there's quite a number of leaders who feel very uncomfortable in front of the camera. What would you suggest for someone who has that hesitancy? Do you have any tips on that? Because you had to live it, you had to go through it.
Yeah, I think it probably comes down to...
What do you think were some of the key aspects to help you grow into leadership?
One of the things that's been most impactful in my journey and path.
Is there any language or questions or anything you would suggest a leader to use when talking with their team?
Yeah, I think one of the things is...
Very excited about today's guest on the show, the Healthcare Leaders Insight. Really want to make sure that we have some of the best folks we can get in front of you to help you in your leadership journey. And many of you in the group have requested to have leaders on the show to give ideas on how to grow in our career, how to grow in our leadership, to make sure that we're able to do it effectively. And I've got a great guest for us today. I have Mr. Wayne Young. He is the leader, the CEO of the Harris Center for IDD and Mental Health. It's the largest organization of its type in Texas and one of the largest in the United States. Over 2,500 employees and growing. And welcome to the show, Wayne.
Thanks, I'm glad to be here.
Well, today we're going to focus more on leadership. We're going to focus on how leaders can go through that journey and grow in their leadership, but at the same time being able to take care of themselves, right? And when I say take care of themselves from a mental health aspect. So I'd like to start off, you've got a long storied career. To get to where you've gotten now, no doubt you had to do some things that were intentional to help you in that journey as a leader. So let's talk first about what do you think were some of the key aspects to help you grow into leadership, and then we'll move into how does mental health kind of play into that, how you're able to address that.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that's been most impactful in my journey and path really have been mentors. Other leaders who were willing to formally or even informally. Sometimes I joke, and I've got mentors who I don't even know if they knew it, right? Like you just kind of find people and you think, wow, I really like the way they handle this, or I like the way that they conduct themselves, or I like the way that they approach, problem X, Y, or Z, and then really be intentional about trying to learn from them. And certainly there have been people who I did have more formal mentoring relationships with. They know it. We would have lunch. They would kind of offer me their expertise and insights, and really were intentional about helping me grow. Especially early in my career, I think about the opportunities I had in terms of jobs and that sort of thing. Almost every one of them came from a mentor who was willing to speak my name in a room, or who heard about an opportunity and said, hey, I know somebody who might be really good at that. And then my last CEO that I worked for before I took this opportunity was a tremendous leader, a great guy. I never sat down and said, will you mentor me? But I suspect he knew that I watched him, and I watched the way he managed situations and the way he approached challenges and developed opportunities, and learned so much about being a CEO from the way he conducted himself and the way that he helped the organization move forward. So whenever I talk with early careerists or even people further into their career, I try and really almost overemphasize the importance of mentors and relationships with those who have kind of trudged this path a little bit already.
Very good. First of all, let's put a name on this. Who's the CEO you have in mind?
Yeah, so the CEO that I was talking about in my last organization was Robert Early, and he was the CEO of JPS Health Network. Okay,
so thinking of Robert, what's probably one of the biggest takeaways you got from him as looking from a mentorship, him being, whether he knew it or not, him being your mentor, what was one of those big lessons you learned from him?
So one of the things that was amazing about Robert was his ability to connect with people. He just had this instant ability to have people help people feel important and connected, and we would do rounding, and I would round with him, and it was like rounding with a rock star, right? I mean, like people would stop and take selfies with him and high fives as he's walking down the hall, all because he had rapport. He was approachable, he had rapport with folks, and they knew that it was okay to come up to him and tell them about whatever was happening, and he knew about their family, and he knew about the circumstances that were going on. And so that ability and intentionality around connecting with your team, being authentic and genuine. He was also a really good guy, and that showed through with his authenticity and his approachability. And so I watched that, and I'm not nearly as good at it as he was, but certainly that influenced my approach and my intentionality around some of those same things.
That's great. And so it's interesting you caught that from him. That was one of the biggest building blocks. What do you think is one of those key factors in building rapport with someone? So how are you putting that into practice, or have you put that into practice when you're building that rapport? What's one of those first steps?
Yeah, so to me, a lot of it has to do with authenticity, right? And so it does, like, you have to be interested. Like, you've got to have, if you want to connect and build rapport with people, you have to want to know what's going on with them. And you have to really have an interest. If not, it doesn't feel genuine. And people can feel that, right? If they don't think you're being authentic or real with them, they're not really that interested. And so with good intention, with openness, how's it going, what's going on, knowing what their circumstances are in their family, knowing what's happening with them personally, and following up on that, and hey, how did that turn out? Or, if they've got a kid going to college, being intentional and informed about that, and with sincerity too, right? Not just, taking notes and trying to remember some fact about them, but really caring about what's going on with them in that process.
That is a very key point. Because what you just mentioned about how did it go or how did it turn out wasn't work related. It was with the person's life. So apparently that's one of those building blocks I'm hearing as well. So being authentic, being interested in the person, but not just interested in the person from a work perspective, but you're also talking outside work.
Absolutely. And as much time as we all spend together working together, and that's the reason we have some of these relationships, we're not just that, right? We're not just the people that show up here, right? In fact, most of us are doing this work and doing things not just because we feel passionate about it, but because it helps all the other aspects of our life, right? It helps pay for that college education, or it helps pay for whatever it may be. And so understanding people's why are they doing this job? Why do they work here? And often that comes into the personal aspects of them as well.
Now, did you find for yourself it was something that you had to develop cognitively? Like I've got to intentionally do this, or is it something that may have become natural to imitate because you were kind of raised that way? I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I lean that way anyway, right? I'm a behavioral health clinician by training. I still hold on to my licensure, although it's more than a little rusty probably. But I do think I lean towards that. But I do try and be intentional about it. I want to make sure that I do it. I want to, and even simple times, like some of the most brief but impactful conversations happen in elevators, right? And so when I get on an elevator, I try and put my cell phone away, because somebody's going to get on that elevator, or maybe I'm walking onto an elevator when one of my team members is already there, and it's a great opportunity to check in with somebody, see how they're doing. Sometimes you can tell, and I've had some pretty intense conversations in the 10 seconds, 15, 20 seconds it takes to get downstairs, to the point that people will even follow up with me and say, hey, thanks for asking about that on the elevator, or hey, I mentioned this on the elevator and here's what happened with that. And so, I try and take small things that I can do that make myself more available and be intentional. If I'm walking through the hall, you rarely ever see me with my cell phone out and in front of me, because I want to be able to greet employees and talk to people and say hi to folks as we're going around.
That's a key building block. I love it. So even the 15 seconds or so that you're on the elevator, you're consciously putting it on away, so you're not on your phone, you're able to connect with the person. It makes so much sense.
Absolutely. Very seldom do employees see me with my cell phone out. I just don't do it. I try and be engaged and available and approachable. And even if it's not an intense conversation, sometimes it is, right? I mean, we've all been on the elevator and you step on and somebody is tearful on the elevator, right? And you're like, gosh, seems like something's going on, right? But even if that's not the case, just saying hello, how are you today? How was your weekend? How is your weekend? Do you have plans coming? Just the little small stuff that let people know that you see them as a person and are interested in them as a person.
Yeah. And I think sometimes leaders may underestimate those 15 or so seconds, how much of an impact they can be on that other person. Mm-hmm. You may have several conversations a day, but they only have that one conversation with their leader or the leader in their organization. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it may be the only interaction they have with me for some time, right? I'm not, as big as we are, and as much as I would love to connect with everyone every day, it doesn't happen. And so, it may be that we're just timed right on that elevator, or we're walking out to the parking garage together, and that may be the only time this week, or even over for a few weeks. And so, being engaged and recognizing them and acknowledging them and asking about them, I think is important.
Okay, so let's talk about, that's great points. Let's talk about like your day-to-day interactions in terms of from your desk, you're on Zoom meetings, you're having these meetings. What are some intentional ways you're taking Robert's example there and infusing it in terms of building rapport in those other situations? So
one of the things that is one of my favorite tools, and I borrowed it from someone else, it's not original to me, okay. Is I do short 2-3 minute videos to employees, and I do it as though I'm speaking to them, because I really am. And I tell people, it's one of my employees, when they give me feedback, it's one of the things that they like best in terms of our approaches to communication. And I do it where I'm looking in the camera and I'm just talking to them. And honestly, I tell them I'm glad they like it, because I would probably do it anyway, because it helps me feel connected to them, right? We've got 2,600 employees almost spread across all of Harris County. So, 40-something locations that are out there, and some of those are small. I won't get to see some of those team members. Some of them work nights, or some of them are on different shifts. And so that video gets the highest comments in terms of it also, we can kind of track and see what percentage of things get opened. It has one of the highest open rates, and people engage with it and watch it. And it feels like I'm having a conversation with them. And it usually is around, I try and do a lot of kudos that way. I give a lot of shout outs to people, a lot of appreciation, and we're coming off of the hurricane and its impact here, and it had a big impact on our organization. And so I'm trying to give shout outs to people that went well above and beyond, and recognizing them and the challenges that came with it, and honoring their work, and then giving them organizational updates. If we have a new program that's come up, or if we've got a new thing that we're about to get started, it really seems to be a quick way to help them have some awareness of it. Like I said, my experience is 2 to 3 minutes is about the attention span. So if it goes long, the only thing I can get away with going longer is if it's about compensation. If I'm talking about people's money, they'll hang in there for however long that video is. But if it gets too long, people have to check out, right? Because they're busy and they may have patients to take care of. So often the email will be accompanied by an attachment that has a lot of nuance and details and all the kind of HR speak in it and that sort of thing.
Right.
But my messages are short and crisp and kind of to the point. It's one of my favorite things to do.
That is powerful, and it also explains why you do so well on video. Whenever we've had recruiting videos with you, and you're natural. But maybe that came from the practice.
I was probably not natural when I started. But like last week, right after the hurricane, I did 3 videos last week. I did one this morning. The other thing is I will only do one take. So I don't want it to be polished. I don't want it to be edited.
Okay.
When I first started off, I did it with my cell phone, and my communications team was like, "No, we'll send somebody." I'm like, "I don't want all that. Like, this is a conversation."
Okay.
And so they said, "Well, you've at least got to put it on a tripod," because apparently I was moving it around too much. So, but I did. Now I do it. We've all gotten so adept at Zoom, and it has such a nice structure. I just do it through my Zoom camera, but there's no editing to it. They cut out the couple of seconds where I'm looking for the button to push record and stop it. But other than trimming the ends of it, I do it in one take. If I mess up, I just say, "Sorry about that. Let me re-say that." And try and have it be as kind of real and authentic as I can.
Okay, so that's an actionable thing for our audience is do some videos.
People love it.
So just from a practical standpoint, you're using Zoom. That's the software you're using.
Yep.
And then you're just
using
like
my regular camera on my computer.
Okay.
I just start a meeting that's just me. I hit record, I recenter myself, and start with a smile, right? Because I'm usually distracted by other stuff. I've got a couple of key points that I know I want to make. I try not to make it too long. Speak to my team directly, and then hit end. I've got a little shared folder that I move it over into, and I let my communications team know there's a video. They know that it'll be saved in a file with today's date, and I tell them I'd like this video to go out today, and they shoot me back an email and let me know when it's out.
I love it.
It literally, my videos are 2 to 3 minutes, so it's a 5-minute process from beginning to end, and I get to communicate and have 2,600 people, if they have time, see me with 5 minutes worth of effort. And hear something that probably was important to them, or that they appreciated getting a shout out from somebody.
Absolutely. And logistically speaking, you've got 40 something clinics?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how much time would it take to physically go to each location?
It would be impossible. That would be my whole job, right? And by the time I got to the 40th one, the information would be old then, right? I mean, because part of what I wanted to do is, during the hurricane, we had an IDD group home that we take care of people with intellectual disabilities 24/7, and their home was damaged. We had water coming in, and so we had to relocate them. And then that first relocation didn't work so well for that group, and so we moved them to a second location. And I wanted to give kudos to that team. That took a lot of moving around, right? We had a youth diversion center. It's a center where we have youth, instead of taken to juvenile detention, they bring them to us for mental health treatment in a crisis. And they lost power there, and so we had to move them into a secondary location, and food services weren't up, so our team was finding pizza and making food, and
Right.
I want to honor that. That was a lot, and during all that, they kept making sure that the mental health needs of that population was taken care of, and so I wanted to give them a shout out, and they probably appreciated it too. I hope they did, and so it was. But I wanted to catch a lot of those moments as we were doing it and share it near real time, and so it's also a quick way. By the time you do the written and you get to a newsletter, it almost feels like old news as fast as everything goes today.
So I want to thank you. I want to show gratitude for that, not only to you, but your team members who made that happen, because I live in this community, so thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Now, I do want to address something that has come up quite often, is that there's quite a number of leaders who feel very uncomfortable in front of the camera. I've heard it, and sometimes it'll just take even when we have a scheduled session, it may take a little bit of me just working and coaching with them a little bit to get them up to speed. So what would you suggest for someone who has that hesitancy? The Zoom, I like the way you mentioned that. That helps take a little bit of the learning curve out of it, because they probably know how to use Zoom.
Yeah.
So, but what are the thoughts about, maybe being afraid of saying the wrong thing, or just afraid of being in the camera? Or do you have any tips on that? Because you had to live it, you had to go through it.
Yeah, I think it's probably comes down to practice as much as anything, right? I mean, if you think about, we're leaders, right? And if we had a team member who maybe they had an area that wasn't their strength, we wouldn't say don't do it, right? And we wouldn't say the first time you do it, you're going to be perfect at it, or gotta be, right? We'd say, hey, why don't we'd get a little coaching around it, get some strategy, say, okay, now go give it a shot, right? And I have learned, I used to watch the video. I don't even watch them anymore. I record it, pass it on, and I don't even take a look at it. I would pour over it, right? And I'd want to change it, and I'd resist the urge to it. And so I don't have a huge media background. I've probably, like a lot of executives, I've had one or two kind of coaching sessions where they, give you strategies and help talk about it. So whatever comfort I may have just comes with repetition and getting familiar with it, and trying to, as much as I can, forget it. Like just this conversation. I mean, we know it's being recorded, but I don't have to really attend to all that. I can just talk and be present in the moment and go for it.
That makes sense. And when you said repetition, it just reminds me, if they did hit record and they did it, they don't have to send that out.
Yeah.
Right?
I do it in one take, but you don't have to. You can do it as many takes as you want to take.
Yeah.
I do it for expediency and because I don't want it to feel too rehearsed. But if you totally blow it and you end up freezing in front of the camera, you just hit end session, start a new one, and the recording starts all over. And nobody ever knew that one existed, right? So
exactly.
No harm done. And because you don't have an audience, you don't have a crew working with you. It's just you in your office. And I do a lot of mine early in the morning. I tend to come in early before the day gets started, and it's quiet and it's calm, and my mind's settled and I'm present. And so it's an easy time for me to get 5 minutes, kind of into the groove of it.
So that's interesting. You mentioned about getting in early. I know there's some intentionality behind that. Do you feel that's given you a strategic advantage in some cases, the fact that you do come in early?
I feel like that first hour of my day sometimes is one of the most productive hours, right? I can, I don't schedule anything in it, so I show up. I'm typically work around 7, sometimes 6:45, sometimes 7:15, but I show up. I usually, as I'm coming in, I kind of know what I need to focus on. I'm like, oh, I've got this, or tomorrow I've got a board meeting, and so I need to get my comments ready. I need to be prepared for that, or we've got this big presentation we're going to try and do, and what are the gaps in there? What do I not feel comfortable with on that? And so I know what I will want to lean into, but it's unscheduled time. I can make it what I want it to be, but it's invaluable. And I feel like I get 3 times as much done in that hour before all the stuff happens, right?
Right.
And the fact that we keep it unscheduled, because if not, I'm sure that people would be happy to fill it up with meetings and conversations. But it is kind of a time for me to focus on what I think is most important, or maybe what's most pressing at least.
Yeah. That's a key point. The fact that even if it was in the evening, whether it's in the morning or the evening, the fact that it's unscheduled, that you don't have other meetings coming in during that time where you can actually think and focus and really think strategically. So I love that point. Do you think that if someone is more of a later person than they are a morning person, would you suggest that hour or so is probably just as productive in the evening? Am I making a wrong assumption, or do you think it's better it's in the morning?
I don't know. For me, I'm by the end of the day, I get a little worn down, right? I'm not quite as fresh as I am in the morning. But for some of those people who kind of skew a little later, maybe they're just getting revved up, right? So that might be. For me, the other part of that equation for me is, I have a younger son And so for me, I try and get out of here at a decent hour so I have a little bit of work-life balance. And I want to be present at home and for my family. And so coming in early, he's especially right now it's summertime, he's not even awake. He has no idea when I'm leaving, and so he doesn't even recognize I'm not around in the morning because he's sleeping in. So it is a nice way to get some extra time in here and attend to things without having to compromise or give up time with the family. And so, and not that I don't work late, and not that there's not some nights I get home far later than I would like to, but in general, when I can, I keep the evenings free so that I can get home and spend some time with the family.
That's a great point you mentioned about work-life balance. So how do you balance that? Because a lot of leaders are wondering how they're able to juggle their leadership responsibilities, but still being able to feel fulfilled from a life perspective, right? So what are some things that you've done intentional-wise? It sounds like one of them is getting home fairly early in the evening. Yep. Are there any others you can think of?
I also think it is important to take time away, right? Like, so, one of my strategies is when I've shared that my kid's younger. He's in middle school right now. He's going into 6th grade here in the fall. And so when his school calendar comes out, whenever the school holidays are, I go on my calendar and block them out if I can. So I've got them blocked out a year in advance. Now, sometimes I get to that day and I can't take it off, right? Like there's something has come up and I just got to work that day. So I don't always, it's not every school holiday I'm off, but I've got him on the calendar, and if something doesn't encroach, then I'll take that time off and spend it with him. And so when he's out of school, I'm off work, and we spend time hanging out, doing whatever it is, often whatever it is that he wants to do, to be honest. But also taking the time away, being on vacation, whether it's us as a family or extended family, being intentional about getting away and being away from the office. I'm blessed. I've got a really good team. I have a tremendous leadership team who's really talented and capable. And so I can slip out of the city, the state, even the country, and I don't have to worry about it that much because I know they're going to be able to take care of stuff. And so, creating that space for me to be well and healthy and balanced and re-energized, because when I come back from those, I'm often feeling the best I have in a while, right? And that's also probably helpful for those that I work with closely. They may be like, hey, it's a good time for you to take a few days off, right? Maybe that's why they're so happy to step up when I'm not here, is because they recognize I'm probably a better leader when I come back recharged and energized.
That's a great point. So I wanted to move to also some practical things about initiatives that maybe you've done as an organization or things personally that you think will do well to help leaders with addressing mental health concerns. What are some things that you would like to share that you think have been winners for you in terms of helping you from a mental health perspective to keep things in the right perspective so you can take care of your team, take care of, obviously you said, your family, and then yourself as a leader from a mental health perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that's important around this conversation around mental health, and obviously that's my business, right? So I've got a little bias and I lean in there. And if you've been around me much at all, it's usually pretty common knowledge that I'm in long-term recovery. I acknowledge, having lived experience with mental health concerns and being in recovery. And so to me, I think that's important. It's a part of being authentic. 1 in 4 people in our country are going to have a diagnosed mental health condition during their lifetime. So odds are, it's going to impact people. And I think one of the things that's helpful to our team is for them to know that that's okay. It's not scary. It's not stigmatized. And so I share that. I share it in new employee orientation. Now, again, I'm in the context of a mental health organization, so it's probably a little easier. It's a part of my career path even. And so and how I kind of came into this field. But I think it's important to normalize mental health. I think it's important to normalize getting support and treatment for mental health. I'm not an ongoing treatment and care all the time, but when I need it, I am. I have an executive coach, and I think one of the reasons we came up with executive coaches is it's almost like a counselor, but we don't call them that, right? We call them a coach, and so because I think most of us have this dynamic with our coach, who it's kind of a protected relationship, and we know that it's safe, and we know that they just have what's in our best interest at heart and in mind, and helping us see around corners that we may not be able to see, and help us check our blind spots. And while I don't think of my coach is helping me from a direct kind of mental health treatment perspective, I do know that my coach helps me think about and reframe things when it's feeling challenging, or when it might be feeling overwhelming, or when it's stressful. My coach happens to be a she, is able to reframe and kind of redirect some of that and challenge some of those assumptions in the same ways that supportive friends and family and counselors might too. And so I think being intentional about creating that space and having that relationship, and for those who don't have one, I don't know what I would do without mine. She's invaluable and helps me in multiple ways, both with my own professional journey as well as my team and how I engage my team. And so that adds tremendous value for me. And I also think one of the other things that's important in that dynamic is figuring out how do you support your team. I mentioned, we recently had a hurricane that came through here, and 2 million plus people in our community was without power. And that's an inconvenience for about 12 hours, and then it becomes a problem, right?
Yeah,
and so,
exactly.
it was almost a universal experience in our community. Half of the people in Harris County did not have electricity for a fairly long time.
Yeah.
And that does begin to wear on you, and frustrations can grow, and hopelessness can set in. And so, helping your team and helping reframe that and helping normalize that, I think, is an important part of being a leader. So even if that didn't have as much of an impact on me in terms of that storm, recognizing that it did have an impact on my team and thinking about how do I support them? How do I do this? For some, it was resources. We had some employees that were resource constrained, right? And if you think about it, you lose power for a long time, all your food's gone, right? And there's some people who have real food instability. And so so my HR team and group rallied together, and we put together a little bit of a food drive for our own team, right?
Oh,
Normally it's for our clients, but in this case we did it to support our own team. Really intentionally promoting the EAP. We have an internal kind of response team, we call it RISE, and helping our team recognize that we have those kind of peer supports that are out there and available in the organization for them to reach out to is another part of our strategy. But talking about it, sending the information out, talking about the other resources in our community. So just attending to some of those basic things that, as you mentioned earlier, that are just about our team members being people, right? And not about their role as a care. We have team members who are care coordinators and case managers, and that's what they do for a living, right? But
right.
A part of it, what a crisis can do is kind of overwhelm your normal response. And so even though they are really adept at doing that themselves, they might have been in a moment where they couldn't kind of shift outside of what was happening to them and begin to problem solve. And so we helped them with that and did that in a way that was, not overly patting ourselves on the back. It wasn't about, oh, we're great people. It was about how do we support each other in this time of need and challenge. And so, because when things get really tough, is when often the community begins to look at the kind of the public mental health system in terms of how can they help us.
Yeah.
And so we got to make sure our people are well taken care of too.
I would like to, while I have you on, just to talk about just kind of the global general perspective of mental health. I remember when we had prior conversations, it was in the heart of what we faced in 2020, which was unusual.
Yeah.
Now that we've kind of moved forward out of that, how have you seen mental health and the way it's being addressed, the stigmatization of it, maybe the treatment of it, programs? Just from your perspective, what have you seen in terms of progress or that sort of?
I think there's much more openness around mental health conversations than there ever has been. I've been doing this work for 30 years, and it is much more kind of acceptable. And I really think, and I suspected this might be the case in the midst of the pandemic, but it has proven true. I think that shared experience, like nobody was able to say that didn't affect them, right? I mean, It was, no matter, it might have been big challenges or small challenges, but we were all impacted by it to some degree. And even if it was just, I got to get out of this house, I got to interact with people, right? All the way to really serious impacts. It was this shared experience that I think kind of made it okay, right? Because it wasn't anything wrong with me, as society sometimes tell people when they have mental health problems or frankly other problems. But it was this shared experience that we're all impacted by, and so it almost inherently didn't have the same level of stigma to it. And as this kind of generation has begun to move into the workforce, who were, kind of grew up in an age where the stigma was not as significant, where it was okay to talk about that stuff. As they enter the workforce, they're almost insisting upon it, right? Like it's not unusual for them to say, oh, I was talking to my counselor, or, oh, hey, I'm looking for a new counselor. Do you know somebody that's good? That is not a foreign conversation to them, or one that makes them uncomfortable. And so their comfort with it is going to force organizations to be more leaning forward and engaging in that dialogue. And so, I'm not, there's lots of challenges around the pandemic, and I'm not trying to, mitigate those challenges, but from a mental health perspective, and there were very real mental health impacts to it as well, it did at least, reduced some of the stigma and opened up that conversation. Now, our youth are still very much in crisis around this, and the impact of that is still being seen with our kids. And so I don't want to minimize the seriousness of that by any means, but I'm happy about the openness of conversation and dialogue that we're having.
That's good. That's encouraging to hear. Now, in terms of mental health and in terms of leaders making their team, their direct reports feel more comfortable talking about these issues, is there any language or questions or anything you would suggest a leader to use when talking with their team?
Yeah, I think one of the things is kind of a comfort and directness, right? Like not using euphemisms, not beating around the bush a little bit, saying, hey, I know it's been stressful. If you need to take a day off to attend to kind of your wellness and mental health, then feel free to put in that day of PTO. I'll certainly approve it. I know this has been challenging in this dynamic. It's been stressful. Just kind of creating routine and regular conversations. I think people, 1 in 4 people meet criteria for a mental health condition, right? So it's not like this is a rare occurrence. This is pretty common.
Right.
And we're all struggling with it, and we're all dealing with it at different times and in different ways. And so this idea of creating a comfort and acceptance and using the words, but not stigmatizing words, right? And not labeling people. It's always person first language. It's, is there any way I can help you? Is there any support we can provide for you? Kind of open questions around that, as opposed to you need to X, you need to do X, or you should do Y, but how can we support you? Are there different supports that you might benefit from that we can help you identify, or kind of that open, how might we be of support and assistance to you? No different than we would if they were experiencing anything else, right? If they were having, it's interesting to me that we don't think anything about, especially in the healthcare world, anything about, oh, hey, I know this great specialist that does this, or hey, I heard you said you needed surgery, I got this great surgeon. But people aren't always as comfortable, hey, I got this great counselor, here's the,
Right.
But we could be, because between us and our families and our kids, we know lots of mental health professionals. And so I think just offering that up and speaking to it in a normal way, even if people are uncomfortable with it, they may not always lean in the moment, but letting it float out there and let people see it and acknowledging it, I think really goes a long way.
That's great. That's encouraging. And I remember one of the things that we used to say in our company when it's needed is, I need to take a mental health day. And it wasn't they had a cold or some other, it was like, I've got to take a mental health day. And I think having that kind of openness and leaving it open is going to help your employees feel more comfortable. That was very helpful. Now, as we kind of land the plane here, I would love for you to give us any advice from a leadership perspective, maybe anything that it's kind of helped you. Now, you said 30 years you've been in the business, so if we were to go back 30 years in your career, if there was some advice you'd love to give to yourself, that makes it easier. But I want to kind of land it with a key piece of advice you'd like to share with our healthcare leaders, or just our leaders in general.
Yeah, I'm gonna respond to that by kind of circling back to where we started.
Okay.
And that is, finding those people who are influential, who can be mentors, those people who have been there and done that. They have the T-shirt, they know how this works, and building those relationships, watching them, even if it's a little bit from a distance, not in a stalking way, right? But in a helpful mentoring kind of approach, and being open about it and saying, hey, I saw how you did that. Can you help me understand why you did it this way? Or but being very intentional about trying to create relationships with those who can provide some guidance, who can provide some insight, and who can help along. And my experience is, people, especially those that are a little further in their career, they often enjoy it, right? It's not a burden on them. I mean, I'm sure you could make it a burden, but that's not the spirit of it, right? But my experience is, in general, they like kind of helping folks move forward, and they like helping kind of mentor and usher people through and into their career in ways that are helpful and impactful, because almost all of us had that to some degree. I don't know anybody that completely cut their own path and didn't have support and help and guidance from others. And so I think they can appreciate almost it's a paying back, if you will, into this. And so that's the number one tip I always, when I meet with early careers and they're like, what advice do you have? It's always around the mentoring thing, and be intentional about who your bosses are, because it makes a huge difference.
I know you said person first language. So if you could kind of give us a little bit better idea of what you mean by person first language, and also what language we should avoid when it comes to mental health.
Absolutely. So, you hear people talk in shorthand around, he is schizophrenic, he is depressed. That's not person first language, right? And so person first language, the way you would reframe that is, that's a person who's experiencing depression. That's a person who has schizophrenia.
Okay.
That's a person who is
sounds better.
Really not well today, right? As opposed to a sick person, right? And so person first acknowledges that this is a person. This is a being, a human, and they are struggling with X, Y, or Z, as opposed to, what we tend to do is in shorthand, we almost give people labels, right?
Yes.
It's the same way of, he's an accountant. Oh, the accountant's over there, or it's a common shorthand, but really they are people who do accounting at the end of the day, right? They are so much more than accountants. They're so much more than depressed. And so at least in our work and in our environments, there's a fair amount of sensitivity given to make sure that we acknowledge the personhood first.
I love that. It makes it so much better. Like you made me think of also the term when we say a person is a homeless person, but it's a person who's experiencing homelessness.
Yep, a person who's unhoused. A person, if you say someone who, you almost always get it right.
I love it.
Because it acknowledges that, because it is, and if you think about it, if we were to think about the characterization that comes to mind when you say someone who's homeless, right, or a homeless person, you almost immediately fall into these stereotypes, right? And you get these categories of people and this middle model, we all have it, of what that means, as opposed to when you say, well, someone who's experiencing homelessness. All of a sudden, I get a whole different visual around that, right? I picture people I know or could know, and it reframes that in a way that makes it, I think, more real.
Very insightful. Thank you for today. This has been an amazing session. I really appreciate you taking out the time to not only share these things with me, but also with my audience. So thank you very much.
I appreciate the opportunity.